The Registered Outreach Instructor Program from CEDIA is our association's efforts to educate the professional trades on things that we do. So there's a whole series of training lessons that are CEU accredited for both the AIA and ASID and I get all these acronyms wrong, but all the interior design, thank you. So as a part of this course, all of you that need that, we will be getting those certificates and actually bring them to you when they come back to us, and you'll get to apply those to your accreditation program. So without further ado, and again, since this is a very structured presentation, and I'm not supposed to deviate much except for questions and answers, feel free to ask questions because then we can go offline a little bit. For those of you that aren't aware, I think most of you were here from this morning, so we don't need to introduce myself, but CEDIA is our largest trade association in the custom audio-video industry, and it stands for Custom Electronic Design and Installation Association. It is a trade association with more than 3,500 member companies that specialize in designing and installing low-voltage electronic systems for the home. And as I said earlier, it also is the outreach mechanism that we use in our industry to work with and educate our professional people like yourselves. So it's recognized by the American Institute of Architects, the IDECEC, all these credentials will get down to what we're supposed to be learning. So the objectives of this course are pretty simple. Theo showed you a lot of different design aspects, what he is exceedingly good at. Whether you like his designs or not, most of the time his designs are derived by what his clients want. And he's really good at taking their thoughts and putting it into action. This course is really more about the mechanics of how do you put a good room together. So our objectives are going to be, we're going to define what a dedicated home theater is and its attributes. We're going to discuss the science of good sound. We're going to analyze common and costly mistakes that we find in home theater design. We're going to identify specific theater design considerations such as video optimization, lighting, electrical, and safety and comfort. And we're going to analyze technology implementation planning strategies. So I think we'll start with what is the definition of a dedicated theater room. And earlier this morning we were talking about clients who might want multi-purpose versus a dedicated theater room. So it's a fair question. We probably do more media rooms than we do dedicated theaters. So to me it's all about finding people who are passionate about movies and have a budget that allows them to dedicate a certain amount of space just for watching movies. It doesn't mean they can't go in that really nice space and listen to music, because they can. If the room is done correctly, it should sound great musically as well as for movies, but it's a dedicated room typically. A media room is typically what we find in our great rooms. It's a room where you have all kinds of different functions. So the dedicated theater space is a room with a singular purpose of watching movies and other video sources. The objectives of the space are to provide the superior audio and video to the client in a pleasant, comfortable, well-designed environment. So it's really designed to be something better than they would get anywhere else in the house, or maybe even anywhere else, period. Where they can really disengage, relax after a hard day, and put themselves into a movie. One of the problems with theater rooms is failing to educate the client properly about the dedicated theater space uses first. And we find that's a problem. And one of the things I would also point out is that you can't start too early involving a custom integrator in the process, because a lot of times some of the biggest mistakes we see in a theater room start with the room. And if we have any control over the room, then you have a much better control over how good the actual system turns out. So the typical attributes of a well-designed theater: you have sound isolation, It's optimized for audio performance. It's optimized for video performance. We have control of the lighting. There are specific electrical requirements. And then there's safety and comfort. So those are the main aspects that we're going to talk about when we put a design for a theater room together. Starting with sound isolation. With sound isolation, you want to keep the soundtrack of the movie in the room and the distracting noises from the rest of the world out of the room. That's the main guiding principle there. When we talk about optimizing the audio performance of the room, this area can be considered the most important area to have a knowledgeable electronic system design specialist assist you with those considerations. So that's where someone like me takes that room and does the proper enhancements so that you're hearing what the director of the movie wanted you to hear when he made it. And that's basically has to do with the electronics in the room, the acoustics in the room, and the design and layout of that equipment. Optimizing the video is along the similar lines. It takes professional. The color and reflectivity of the walls, I think if you remember from Theo's presentation, that in general, one of the reasons you don't want to use lighter colors on the walls is because you have a powerful projector that projects light onto a screen. That screen reflects light back out, and the color that bounces around the room, if you have colors that are light, it produces more light, which means your picture becomes less vivid. If you have any really strong lime green or something really wild in your light, it takes and changes the colors that people perceive on the screen. So those are things you want to, if you ever wondered why all the theaters are always these dark burgundies and darker colors and blues, it's because when the lights go out, we want as much light as possible to not bounce off the walls. We want everything to be focused right here. Same thing with lighting. Most of the theaters are designed, you have two kinds of lighting. One to enhance the look of the room, which is the first thing people see when they walk in, so the ooh-ah of the space. And then for safety purposes, when you're watching a movie in an ideal world, you want to turn off all the lights, and you want everything to be focused right here. But because people need to get up, they want to walk, out of the room, you have to have some safety lighting around. A lot of times we'll put little tiny lights in the stair-step treads or a rope light or something so that someone can very discreetly walk out of the room or into the room without harming themselves. Electrical power. It's really important that you have your custom integrator do an analysis of all the equipment that's going to go in that theater and make sure that they have enough dedicated circuits for that. Because some of these equipment really draw a lot of power, and you can have a lot of problems. If you have some noisy power on the same circuit that you have your projector on, it can cause video distortion. So there's all kinds of things you want to have a little prior planning on to make sure that doesn't happen. And we already talked about safety and comfort. That has to do with the lighting. Another thing I will tell you. Let me finish my one thought. I'm over 50, and if I don't finish the thought right away, there you go. Theater rooms, because of the acoustics and the fact that we've kind of sealed them in, and sometimes the equipment is in the room, very rarely do they need a lot of heating. What they most often need, even in the wintertime, in an ideal world, you would want to have a separate feed for your HVAC system that would allow you to cool that room and control it separately. So that's just one of the things that gets overlooked a lot. And when we talk about noise control, that'll be the other thing, is how do we pump air and volume of air into a space without making a noise that distorts from the sound. So that being said, what was your question?
Well, this, I don't need a lot of detail, but the thing is when a client says, oh, I would like a dedicated theater room, except they don't really have the ideal choice. I mean, a lot of times there's windows involved in rooms, and you're thinking, well, that's the only one that's not being used. Can that all be worked around? Are there ways to do it, or are you just too bad you can't have one?
Well, I'd like to be so busy that I could be that picky, but I personally am not. We had a client one time that had a dynamite house. In fact, I took more pictures of their house than I did our stuff in it, because most of our stuff was disappeared. But their theater was round. Absolute worst thing you can do is have a round theater, because all the sound bounces to the center. Far from ideal. We actually made it sound good. We had to use some really good equipment that we spent more hours on calibrating the room than we did on putting it together. So
it's possible.
Absolutely. With windows, we have roller shades that you don't see unless you need to, but when they come down, they blacken out the room. And it can all be done just by hitting the play button. You just hit one button and shades come down, the lights dim, and the movie comes on. So it's a good question. Very rarely do we get an ideal situation. To me, an ideal client is somebody who's just thinking about designing their house, and they're going to build one, and they talk to you, and you can say, okay, let's talk about the home theater, and you get to eke out your little space. There's 2 spaces in the home I covet greatly. Wherever the theater room is going to be and what the shape and size of it is, and where all the equipment gets to go, the equipment room. We usually get the leftovers. That's a good question. So I'm really blessed. I have some extremely talented staff. We've been around for 24 years, so I would have to say we've either made all the mistakes or we've been introduced to some really bad environments and we've done a good job on them. But the quicker we're involved, the better, and there's a lot of solutions. And we're really good at giving people options. Any other questions on? So we were talking a little bit about room physics and human perception. This goes back to what I said earlier. You can take the best equipment out there. Someone could spend, and this is not even close to the top of the iceberg, but someone could spend $150,000 on a pair of speakers. And you might think, wow, who would do that? You'd be surprised. But you could take a $150,000 pair of speakers and put them in a bad room, and they're still not going to sound good. So the room has more to do with what we hear and sometimes see than the gear and equipment that go into it. It's been determined that you can be sacrificing as much as 50 to 80% of the potential performance in a room just by having a room that doesn't work with the right dimensions and the right acoustical treatments. So that's why we spend so much time on it. So sound is the biggest thing. If you go to a movie studio, if you go to one of their studios, their target reference noise level inside that studio is 22 dB, which is very quiet. This room, for example, you can hear the air conditioning and stuff. This is a very noisy room. If this was a theater room, it would be objectionable to me. The ambient noise in a typical home is 33 dB, so no matter, just if you took a room all by itself in a typical house, it's already noisier than you want it to be. So the real goal is to get the noise level in the room down and not let the noise that's in the room escape. That's the other thing we want to do with the noise. I don't know if anybody noticed, but when you walked into the theater room, did it not sound quieter in there? I mean, you can noticeably walk in and you just feel it. You kind of absence of sound. So that's kind of what we're kind of shooting for. Sound isolation can be done in a lot of different ways. If we have a client that tells us they want to have their theater room so that they can't hear it in the room above them, that's a tough job because what they're really hearing above them is bass. Bass couples to structure. So it takes the structure of the room and transfers itself right up this column. And if there's a room up there, they would actually feel it on the floor structures and they would hear it. So that's a tough one, but it's not impossible. We did a project in New York where the client said, excuse my French, he wanted a really kick-ass theater. He spent a lot of money on it, probably $500,000. But he did not want to hear it in the great room upstairs. And I'm like, I'll do the best we can. We actually hired an acoustical firm to help us. And the way you do that is very possible, but you have to really know what you're doing. So in that particular room, we built a room within a room, meaning we decoupled it from the structure of the house. They had one column. We cut the pad around the column and took it, so that nothing in that room transferred upstairs directly. We had to use special dampening acoustical ducts. And I would say unless he was really watching one of the loudest movies at a really high level, most times you would never know there was a theater below that space. So it's entirely possible to do. It's more a matter of budget, you know, that's always the qualifying factor. Will the budget allow us to do it? And there's things we can do. There's some stuff that looks like a blanket that's about this thick. My installers hate it because it weighs 100 pounds a square yard. But it can go a long way on a budget to help eliminate at least a lot of the noise it transfers. One of the common complaints we see in poorly designed theater rooms, and this is where you'll notice where this happens, is if you're watching a movie, let's just say it's a war movie, and there's bombs exploding, and it gets so loud you want to turn it down, so someone reaches for the volume control and they turn down the volume. And then about 5 scenes later, there's a really quiet scene where there's talking. Next thing you know, you can't hear the voices, and then you're hitting the volume control back up. So if you find yourself chasing volume in a room, it's a clear indicator that the acoustics weren't done correctly, because that's something we can do. Because when that movie was authored, it was designed so that you could hear not only the voices but the bombs, and they shouldn't be conflicting. So when we treat a room for sound, we're looking at a couple different things. Sound reflection. If you remember in the front of that theater, in the front third of that room, we're absorbing the sound that bounces off the walls and the ceilings and the floors. That's so you don't hear those reflected sounds coming right off the speakers. The ambient noise is what I talked about just a second ago, about trying to make sure we don't let any noise from outside the room come in, and we try to adjudicate the noise that's inside the room from going out. So, for example, these kind of air diffusers would be a no-no in a home theater. They make way too much noise. We typically would like to see a HVAC duct that's insulated for noise. And if anything, a linear diffuser, something that's long and narrow with a low airflow, is better, because it doesn't whistle and rattle. Rattling is a big problem in a theater room, big problem. So if someone just has a traditional ductwork going above the ceiling, it's going to rattle. My first rule is, if I get the HVAC contractor to work with me, is that there does not need to be a duct running across that room, get it out of there. Second rule is, if there is one, then we need to do something with the ductwork to help keep it from rattling. Because bass, as I said, it adheres to the structure, it will cause stuff to rattle. It's the other reason we don't use drop-tile ceilings. You can literally do a bass test in a room and watch some things dance. It's pretty fun. Also, if you're in a poorly designed room, one of the other things you're going to notice right away is you have a hard time understanding the dialogue. And that nothing will tire a person out from watching a movie faster than if you're struggling to hear the dialogue. I know that firsthand. I've lost about 70% of my hearing in one ear, so I'm always constantly fighting that battle, and it is fatiguing. So in a movie theater, the most important speaker isn't the big ones on the right and left. The most important speaker in a room is the one where the speech comes out of, and having it placed in the right spot. We were just asked to fix a theater the other day. The speaker was put above the screen, facing straight out at 8 feet in the room. The seats were like right here, and the complaint was the movies were too loud. Well, what happened was they were turning it up so loud to hear the voices, because they were shooting over their heads, that when anything loud happened in the movie, it drove them out of the room. And that's because, and the other thing was, you're looking at someone talking here, but the sound's coming here. Your brain's really working hard for that. So that's a no-no. And of course, the most important thing on the slide is you got to hire a professional, right? You got to put our plugs in. We talked about that. I wanted to show you this slide because one of the reasons we cover those walls with cloth treatments is it hides all this ugly stuff. But this stuff, if this room is designed properly, this stuff is put in places where we're trying to either diffuse. This is a diffuser, so you see that it spreads the sound out. And this stuff is all insulated for absorption. So basically, we're trying to get sound and either spread it out or absorb it. And since nobody wants to see this stuff, then we pick out some acoustical transparent material to cover that up. So that's what a room looks like before it gets its finished look. The other thing about acoustics for theater rooms, the toughest thing there is to do in a room like that is acoustics. Bass has a very long-standing wave to it, so you put it in a little room, it goes to that room, and it goes to wall, and goes back and forth. As these sound waves crisscross the room, sometimes they hit each other and cancel each other out, sometimes they build on each other, it's like waves. So in any given room, and my first acoustical class I took, they spent hours mapping this room, and they had X's on the floor. So the exercise was they were playing noise, and we'd stand on this X, and it would be twice as amplified. Then we'd step 3 feet over, and it would almost go silent. And nothing changed. It was the room that was doing it. And that's when I really learned how important sound was in acoustic treatments in a room. So when we design a room, we actually have technology we use to lay out the room based on the dimensions, and it kind of gives us an idea of where the bad places in the room are. And then our mission is to try to move things around so the seats and the speakers all coincide to give you a good listening position. On better theaters, we're doing treatments like this where we have a good 6 to 9 inches in the wall, and we can build our acoustical treatments, and we hide them with whatever you want to pick, to cover that up. And for video optimization, most of the dedicated theaters have pretty large screens, so that's the thing we're trying to do. And as I mentioned earlier, because of that large screen, that large white screen surface, when you project on it, it puts light back into the room. So we want to be careful about that. We talked about having darker colors for the walls, the ceiling, the carpet, and the seats. And one of the things that always amazed me about theater rooms that we run into when we get called in to fix them a lot. The most important thing about a theater room to me is we start with the seating. That's why I advise people. So if someone tells me how many seats they want in a room, we look at the size of the room and say, how many, do we need 2 rows? Can we do a riser? And if we can't, do we have the height in the ceiling to do that? And we do a line of sight drawing. And basically it takes the person in the back row and projects their sight line to the front wall over the top of the people in the front row. So because everybody has to have a clear, unimpeded view of the screen. Wherever those lines hit the wall, so if it hits here and there, this is the maximum vertical distance that screen can be in order for everybody to see it without looking over top of somebody's head. Does that all make sense? Yeah. A lot of times, that size is probably bigger than the client wants to afford, because with the size of the screen is relationship to the projector, and it's all science. That's the thing I'd like to point out to you. None of this, unfortunately in our industry, it's not science. It's a salesperson saying, I think I can sell that projector and the client wants the biggest screen possible and I can make that happen. But in reality, when we design a room, it's based on how many foot candles of light that this screen will reflect based on the power of that projector at this size. When we do a theater project, our goal is to have the video look the same, whether the screen is 8 feet or 12 feet. And the only difference between those two is the amount of projection capability I need on the projector to make it happen. So we start with, what's the biggest screen size we can accommodate the room with to give them the seating they want? And if the screen size doesn't accommodate the room, then we sit down with the client and say, well, here's the trade-offs. We can either put the amount of seats in the room that you want, knowing that, unless you have shorter people in the front, there could be a visual problem, or we change the room, or we drop the screen size down a little bit. The other common thing I have is people always want the biggest screen. It's a guy thing, I don't know why. And so part of that deal is, sorry, I go back. I see people, come back here. I see people take a really big screen, and because of budget, they put a lesser expensive projector on there. And all of you have been to a sports bar, right? You know how faded out the picture looks? That's what happens with a theater room. So we always use science and say, you know, if you have a projection screen this size, you need a projector with that much foot candle capability on the other end of it to put it together. And we usually match them back and forth. And it does not mean that we don't compromise. So we start with science and then we work into reality check. Those of you that are architects, you realize there's the design and then there's what the budget allows you to do afterwards. And so you have to deal with those things. But we like to start with the science first and make sure that we've dealt with the relationship between size of screen and the projector and also the color of the surroundings and control of the light. So in an ideal world, a dedicated theater room doesn't have windows, but if it does, then we need to deal with that.
My
Yes.
question. You were talking about calculating your sight lines. From what height do you calculate that from? Because we know that anatomy changes where people are going to be, you know, you've got someone that's 5'4" and someone that's 6'6", sitting in the same chair in the back row. What's the mean that you use?
Well, the first mean that we use is we start with the people writing the checks. So,
Okay.
what I mean by that is, if I have a client who's 6'6", then I'm going to make sure that we've allowed more of a threshold from the second row. In our industry, we have a little nicknames for what we call the money seats. So
Okay.
in every theater, there's always the 2 best seats. So you tune a room to those because that's where you want the homeowners to sit. They paid all the bucks, right? So we start with them, but typically we'll use averages. And if the room is tight and we know we're really, really pushing it a little bit, then you just tell the client, say, look, we don't have the ceiling height to do this exactly the way I want. If you have taller people, put them in the back row. If you have shorter people, put them in the front. It's common sense. But we typically work with averages, and in particular, though, we do look at the clients. There's a pair of blue theater chairs out there that one of my salespeople mistakenly sold to a very small stature man and wife. They climbed in and their arms couldn't hit the arms. And it was like, they looked like they were in one of those funny movies where the furniture is big and it's just bad, someone just not paying attention. So we talked about this at length, but basically in a dedicated theater, the real goal is to be able to have the room totally dark, if at all possible, with the exception of some exit row lighting. So the lighting in the theater room comes in 2 flavors, one for entering and exiting the theater, and then the other is for illuminating the entire theater to a light level, just to kind of expose them to the room. If we have lights, sometimes in the ceiling we'll have a spot light. It's very narrow beam spotlight, and it's where the client uses the remote control. That's kind of been solved lately because most of our remote controls have backlights on them. In fact, in our theaters, a lot of times we have to teach these not to stay on very long so that you don't have that light emanating, right where you're sitting. And we talked about having, some kind of pathway lighting that doesn't distract from the picture. So it's a bad idea to put lights in front of the screen. It's okay if you want lights to highlight the curtain, if you use a curtain, for example, or a stage, just as long as they're off when the movie starts, and your custom integrator is going to have hopefully all that figured out when they do the lighting. All of our theater rooms, the lights are all controlled by a touch screen, so when you say, I want to watch this Blu-ray player, it automatically adjusts the lights down, everything happens. We give them an intermission button, so when they hit that, it means we're going to take a bio break, and the lights come up, the movie pauses, and so that's all taken care of. But typically in a theater room, you're going to have can lights. You're going to have lights that either feature the columns or the acoustical panel, something on the side walls for really soft lighting. And you're going to have some kind of lighting that shows people when they're walking with their feet how to get, without tripping, especially if you have risers. So it's really important that you do that. Electrical is just really straightforward and simple, but your custom integrator should be able to sit down with his equipment and add up all the power they need and tell your electrician how many circuits they have. One thing that if you're kind of in charge of that project, you just want to make sure the electrician knows if they're told 4 20-amp circuits, make sure that they're not using it for anything else. And make sure that all 4 circuits are on the same phase. If it's a really big house, there could be a whole bunch of different things happening on the electrical side, and you want to make sure that your custom integrator is working with you to make sure that you communicate to the electrician how many amps that you need for power, and making sure that that is all provided and is clean. And it's grounded well. If you don't have a well-grounded electrical system, you'll see it in the video. You'll see all these like wavy little lines, and it's video noise, and it's from the electrical typically. You have a question?
On the lighting, the one before, what, are we talking LEDs for the most part? What kind of lighting are you putting in on it the most?
It's not as important because as long as it's dimmable, so anything that's dimmable. The reason I say it's not as important is because most of the time the lighting is only to show the space off. Once you actually use the room, the lights are off. So it doesn't really matter once the movie starts. It's more about what's the best color temperature of the light to augment your space that you design. And some of the rooms can get very ornate, and so you want to have a lot of lights that show off the architecture of the room. Some are real simple, and the lights are just kind of not hardly there. They're can lights that just light up so people can get in and out. It just depends. As you can tell, Theo comes from New York City. He's first generation Greek. He's very into all these very different styles that, to me, but that's his clients. I've seen some really contemporary stuff from him where lights are a big part of it. It's very contemporary. I've seen the very Art Deco and really over-the-top stuff. Some of his clients have more money than they know what to do with, and they just like spending $1 million on a statue. But he'll go find it, I guarantee you. A couple of other things that kind of gets left out of the mix. If you imagine that you put this, a lot of times these rooms are in the basement. So you created this secluded room, you've isolated it from noise around the house, if you've done it correctly. So you got to be cognizant of the fact that for safety reasons, if the smoke alarm goes off in the house, the clients might want to know that. Some clients want to know if the telephone or the doorbell rings. And usually your custom integrator can do that electronically to let them know. We can actually have the movie pause. We can have a camera pop up on the screen that shows the front door. It's not hard to do, but these are things that get forgotten. Smoke alarms. We typically do a lot of our security in our projects. So we always have a smoke alarm in the custom theater for a couple reasons. One, you've got a very high output projector lamp that gets really hot up there. You've got isolation. You want to make sure the people hear that going off. So as ugly as smoke detectors are, we put them in the rooms. If we have an equipment room where our rack of equipment is, we put a smoke detector in there because they definitely have things that can get really hot in there. So safety and comfort is really important. When I say the seating, this is another thing. It's kind of a pet peeve of mine, but it's in your wheelhouse, so I appeal to you this. When you look at seating catalogs, talk to the AV integrators about theater seating, and the reason I say this is because most of these movies are what, 2 hours long these days? They're designed, you're sitting in a seat for a long time. The thing that's nice about theater seating is most of them are designed piece by piece, so we can configure them any way we want. We can give the client 2 love seats with a armrest in the middle. We can give them individual armrests. We can do curved. We can do all that stuff. But most of them are designed so that you can pick the fabrics, whether they're fabric or leather. We can design the seating, the width, the height. There's a whole bunch of things that you could do that would really make that experience so much better than going to Sofa Express. Not that I'm saying that you guys go there. That's probably one of your banes too, but nothing, I can't tell you, I had a theater room that we were really proud of. This guy wanted a $500,000 theater, but he wanted it for $250,000, and we gave it to him. And he put these $250 chairs in there. And when you sit in them, you just kept going, and it's like after about 30 minutes when you got up, you felt it. And it was like the whole experience got ruined. And we once had somebody that bought 8 Lazy Boys and put them in there. And this room looked really nice, and he had 8 Lazy Boys sitting in there with the little handle. I mean, it was really bad. It was like a crushed velvet. I was like, I just wanted to die. So, safety and comfort is pretty important. I think one of the things that most people don't really think about when you look at a dedicated theater is, and I went to THX training, and THX training is really all about this. It is teaching companies to duplicate exactly what the director saw and heard when he made the movie. That's the whole goal of a THX certification. Because that person spent hundreds and thousands of hours putting together a movie. They edited it, they did the soundtracks, they listened to them. And part of my training, I actually got to go to Luke Skywalker Ranch, which was amazing. It's a village. And when I say it's a village, literally it's in the middle of the California mountains. And it's like you would never know it's there. They have their own cafeterias, their own daycare centers. They've got, it's like a village. But if you ever saw like a folio, who knows what a folio studio is? Cool too. That's where they actually do all the sound effects for a movie. If you actually saw, like at Luke Skywalker Ranch, every car door that's ever slammed in one of their movies is this beat up old Volkswagen Bug. It's the funniest thing you've ever seen, sitting right in the middle of the room. So those people are very creative. You would not believe the props that they use to make the click-clack noise of high heels walking across hard floors and stuff. I don't even know how they come up with this stuff, but it's amazing what they put in to make a movie. So as a professional, our job is to make sure that all that effort that they put into that movie gets reproduced in a room. That's why I said earlier that if someone's never had a professionally done home theater, they don't understand why they want to spend that money until they actually experience one, because the movie theaters just don't do it. So just a summary of our discussion. Sound isolation, we want to keep the soundtrack in and the distracting noises out. A very good integrator is going to be able to help you with that. If you're on a very upscale project and your clients have the means, don't be afraid to bring in an acoustician, somebody who really, really knows acoustical treatments if you're not comfortable that your AV company does. Optimizing the audio performance, that's right in our wheelhouse. That means that we understand by using technology, we can place our speakers in the best places. We know where the bad places are. We know what size rooms we need to make that sound good. Being able to put the speakers in the right place and understanding where to put the acoustical treatments in the first place all goes together for optimizing the audio performance. And when it's done right, you know it. There's people in our industry that sell their, it's the name of them, they're called ass kickers. They're things that go in the seats. And so when there's an explosion, they're designed to rumble the seat. Any really good custom integrator who does theater rooms for a living, if you ever have to do that, it's because you don't know what you're doing. Because in our rooms, you do feel the vibrations. That's part of the experience. So it's just having the experience to know how to do that. Video performance, there's a relationship between the size of the screen and the projector. If you don't get it right, you've lessened the experience. There is a relationship between the colors in the room and what you see on the screen. If you have a white theater room, just know that that room is going to have more of a bleached out picture because there's just going to be too much ambient light in the room, and it's going to come from the projector. If you turn the projector off, that white room is just as dark almost from the human eye standpoint as a room is black. But as soon as light gets in there, you see it. Electrical power, make sure that it's been calculated in advance. I've seen AV companies who haven't taken the time to do that, and they tell the electrician, I need a couple outlets at the rack location. And they get ready to power up the system, and there's just not enough power there. And all of a sudden, breakers in the amplifier start going, things start running hot, or your breakers at the breaker box go. So, and it's hard to add that stuff back in later. I mean, definitely don't want to have to go back and redo that. Just make sure the room is safe, that you've got smoke detectors, that you've got traffic lights that can be on without distracting from the picture, that you're sitting in some really comfortable chairs, that someone put some thought into what they look like and everything, and they're made to sit in for 2 hours. You guys have all experienced what cheap leather feels. Remember back, I'm not going to date anybody, but I remember when we had vinyl seats in our cars. That's what cheap leather feels like after about 40 minutes of sitting in the same spot. So having quality seating really does enhance the movie experience, because otherwise people are squirming around and moving or getting up. And most important thing is planning as early as possible. Because a well-executed plan, starts with a really good design. So if we can start with a blank slate, the factor of that room being successful is much enhanced. If we're brought in after the drywall and the room is there, all I can do is work with what I got. The room is the room, and sometimes just a simple moving it makes a big difference. The other thing I would tell you is that a theater room doesn't normally employ the same construction basics that you would for a normal room. So a lot of times we may have two stud walls with an airspace between them and staggered studs. So there's a lot of things that can be done to make that room sound better and keep noise from going outside the room. But if someone's already got a sheet of drywall on normal studs, we can't do any of that. And 3.5 inches of insulation will do nothing to block out sound coming from a theater room. It would barely cross a dent in it. And that's it of their presentation. So what kind of questions can I help with? Yes?
It's an electrical and HVAC question. In the room where you're going to dedicate all your equipment to rack, do you put or do you suggest some sort of HVAC that's going to keep that area cool, or will that air movement affect anything that can be?
That is such a great question. The most important thing, this also goes, and we'll tie this to just in general, if you're putting electronics in an enclosed space, it's more important to exhaust the heat out of the space than it is to cool the space. All right? People ask me, for example, is it okay to put a flat screen TV above a fireplace because they're worried about the heat? You got more problems with heat if you sink the TV into the wall to make it flush and not provide for the fact that the heat builds up behind it. There's going to be more problems. So in our rooms, we're more concerned with making sure that wherever our equipment is, we have the means to exhaust the heat out of the room. If it's a big enough room, then air conditioning is fine, because it's like a computer room. More times than not, we have a closet or cabinetry or something. So in cabinetry, we have these whisper fans that it's really designed to pull the heat right out of the space and take it up into the wall or the ceiling or someplace where it won't bother anything. So that's really more important. It's the heat that the equipment generates. If it can't dissipate, it will damage your system faster than anything else. The two biggest things that damage electronics, power and heat. So everything that we plug electronics to is filtered. We always have power filtering equipment that go between the power that you get in your house and in our equipment. And we always engineer heat exhaust into our designs. That's a really great question because, you know, in your world, you want to hide all this stuff, right? You don't want, so you want to put it in cabinets, you want to put it in places where it's invisible, but you have to really make sure that it's been designed. And the second thing I would tell you is shoving equipment into a shelved space is impossible to service. You're condemning that client to $300 and $400 service bills based on how much time it takes to try to pull a piece of equipment out and try to get to the wiring. So work with your AV integrator. We will work with you and the cabinet maker to give them the amount of space we need to build. We have these really nice little slide out racks that they can build the shelf for, and it fits right in, and we can slide it out and get to our equipment and put it back. And it's much better, it's much healthier for the equipment, and easier for us to control the heat.
Ideally, access to the back is more important than access to the front.
Yes. If it's designed properly, the client only needs something with a little touch screen to access it. You should never have to go touch stuff, you know, except maybe put a Blu-ray disc in.
Unless you have a client or a family member that's an electronic geek and they want to see the flash lights.
I try to lock those cabinet doors.
But again, it can happen outside of the theater space.
Yeah. Something else I'll tell you, if you have clients who are a little worried about technology, the last 2 or 3 years have been amazing. We now are putting in systems. Almost everything we do now is done on networks that you would normally see in businesses because everything's working off Wi-Fi. Typical house has 15 Wi-Fi connected devices in it. If you have 2.2 kids, a husband and a wife, and a dog and a cat and whatever, you got like 15 connected devices. So we now have, we now install networks in all of our clients' houses that we are actually able to manipulate and control remotely. And so if you guys, either, most of you all have either cable or satellite, right, for your TV. How many times is that box locked up on you? We have clients that have really big houses. They have a whole rack full of DirecTV boxes. They may have 8 of them that feed the entire house. So almost every given month, one of them's locking up. And it used to be we'd have to roll a truck and fix that. Now we can go on our software and just reboot the whole stack of equipment just like that. So we can do a lot with the technology now to kind of, we can also see if something's running too hot. Our media servers are such today where you can actually take all the movies, you can store them on a hard drive. That's what you're watching in our theater room. All those, we have over 100 movies on that, and you can pick them right off of a screen, but they're really on a hard drive in a rack. If you see a client that has an extensive library of CDs or DVDs or Blu-rays, then you definitely want to get your integrator involved early because they can make them enjoy that so much more. It also is a big indicator that you've got somebody that likes movies. But the biggest the biggest advantage we've ever had in music was the iPad, the iPod. And although it degraded the sound, it compensated with making it convenient. Because before that, we had records, right? So you couldn't play them in your car, and they're just clunky. Then we had CDs. Well, we had 8 tracks. I'm really dating myself now.
Some of us are still there.
But we got these mega players eventually that played CDs, and it was more helpful. But still, if you didn't know what was in slot 73, how did you know what to play it? And so now we're to the point where you can pick whatever you want off the internet. You can pick it out of your own personal library right up on a screen. You can see or hear anything you want really fast and easy. That's the world we live in. So it's really it's not necessarily cheap, but it's really easy to set up and enjoy their collection so much more than they used to. So.
Do you still do integration with vinyl?
Yes, vinyl's coming back.
I was gonna say, Cleveland's got a.
We now have turntables.
USB?
We have turntables in every one of our showrooms. So I remember spending an entire paycheck on a new stylus and driving Mike's parents crazy with the noise because I lived in his house. So, but turntables are coming back. You know what's happening? We got so complacent. Everybody started thinking that what we heard in our headphones and was good sound, and all of a sudden people started hearing them again. People my age started remembering and heard some good music. That's why you're seeing all the headphones get much better now. You know, people are getting away from these little earbuds and they're using better headphones. And now we have lossless music you can bring from the internet. And so now people are realizing what they were missing. So now the quality part's coming back. And then you got, once you start people getting reminiscing, then you remember that vinyl does sound different than digital, right? And it's, you know, depending on who you talk to. But, so vinyl's definitely coming back.
Yeah, yesterday I just saw a USB player that you could plug into your computer. That was play vinyl.
Yep.
I've never seen that.
Wow. Any other theater room or technology questions? Yes?
I have a question. It's about the speakers and the diffusers in the wall.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know the spacing between both of them is correct?
That's a good question. You generally have in a dedicated theater, you're going to have what we would call a 7.1 system, which means that you have a center channel speaker for the speech. You have a right and a left. Those are your main effect speakers. And then you'll have, typically, you'll have two side surround speakers back in the room and then two speakers in the rear, and that's your surround speakers. So those are going to be back about 2/3 into the room, and they're kind of behind the audience. And surround speakers, usually they're dipoles or something, they actually send the sound out kind of wide spectrum. And your subwoofers, and for this competition, we're not expecting the students to really be able to lay out the speakers perfectly because that takes software and experience. But the toughest speakers to place in the room are the subwoofers. We solve it by trying, if we've got the budget, believe it or not, we try to use 4. Because with 4 subwoofers, you can if this subwoofer has nulls and voids in the room, that it probably isn't the same ones as that one. So you can, by putting 4 in strategic places, you can have good bass coverage everywhere. If you only have one bass, then you have to be really careful where you put it and where you seat people. So it's kind of touch and go. The more bass sources you have and the more flexibility you have for placing them, you can kind of make the sweet spot a little wider. You know, I remember the first theater we did, and we didn't understand what we did wrong because we were just kind of new to the industry. I actually had a client whose wife was complaining that the noise was too loud and her husband couldn't hear the bass, and they're sitting right next to each other. And I finally went out to their house and I sat in his chair, and he was absolutely right. The bass he was sitting right in a bass null, and it was just a null point where the bass collided and just killed itself. And we moved his chair 2 feet over, and all of a sudden it was improved. And so we had to figure out what to do. I had to actually research this. We had to move his speakers around so we could get the chairs back together. But that was a while ago. We've learned since then. But basically, it does. You know, you're going to have 4 speakers. A lot of times, media rooms, because they're not dedicated theater rooms, a lot of times you're going to see what we call a 5.1 system, where you've got 3 front speakers and just 2 surround speakers and a subwoofer. So, and a lot of times in media rooms, we'll go to in-wall speakers or in-ceiling speakers, just so they're more hidden. In theater rooms, most of our theater rooms, you don't ever see the speakers. They're usually behind the screen or behind columns or something. Occasionally, we have a client who really likes those speakers, so they'll buy really expensive speakers, they want to see them, then we just place them out in the room. So it's kind of really up to the clients.